Have you ever felt that shame of not like fulfilling a goal or anything like that? There's a realization. I think the realization that we need to have around that when we fail at those is not this shame that we feel, even though we do. Instead of realizing that it wasn't our inability to stay disciplined, which it wasn't. We just have to recognize that we had a shitty goal. Our goal was aligned with a result, a superficial result at that, rather than a compelling meaning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flow Over Fear. And today I want to talk about our goal setting routine. And specifically, I want to talk about what you should do instead of setting goals, or rather before you start setting your goals. This is the time of year where a lot of people, beginning of 2024, a lot of people setting their New Year's resolutions, a lot of people saying, hey, don't set New Year's resolutions. That's a bad idea. And a lot of confusion in the middle of that. And I want to address that because there's important statistics in there, real statistics that say that 92% of people do not achieve their New Year's resolutions. They don't see it through past the month of February or March. And there's a reason why that March timeline is so important, because really our attention spans only last about 90 days or so. To say that we're going to achieve something in a year is not out of bounds, but when we do so, simply because it's the beginning of a year, and there's just a timeline we want to set, or there's an impulsive reason for doing it, or we're just sick and tired of being sick and tired, and we don't have great intentionality behind it. We're setting ourselves up for failure. So the solution to that is to look at setting goals in a different way, is to go a few levels above those goals. When we look at the beginning of a year, or when we look at visualizing how we can have our best year, the first thing that we want to do is we want to separate out. You want to separate out the goals from the vision, because a lot of times during the beginning of the year, we get confused. We think that losing 10 pounds is a vision, and it's not a vision. Losing 10 pounds is a result. And the problem is that many of us set our goals or resolutions on an impulse, first of all, because we just don't like maybe the belly fat that we have, or we don't like we're not perfectly satisfied about the way we look, and we see something on Instagram, which is not real, by the way, that tells us that we should that we need to do something like that, or we need to make more money because we think that'll make our happiness. But they're reacting to an emotion. We're reacting to an emotion instead of really evaluating what our deep desires are and getting deep into the root purpose of why we want to lose those 10 pounds, or why we want to make all that money, or we want to do something like that. They're superficial goals, and they're often set on lagging measurables. Weight loss, making money, things that are like goals that are the result rather than the pursuit. They're lagging. They're lagging measurables, and that means that they tell you when a specific result is, or when a specific thing happened, or there are indicators or there are measurements on that. But they're not the drivers, right? You go to the doctor, and the doctor has you stand on a scale and sees that you weigh a different amount than you did last time. That is a measurable that tells you that something happened. It doesn't tell you the whole story behind it. So how can you create a vision that is aligned with your values or your belief systems, that is based on a superficial result that is just an indicator or a lagging measurable? And so those aren't compelling goals. So when you look at your goals, the first reason that they fail is because they're not compelling enough. They're not aligned to any kind of vision, and they're often established in reaction to an emotion, or they're superficial. And what happens when you fail initially, like around February or March? I would bet dollars to donuts, and I don't know why we're betting dollars to donuts. Why? That sounds like a transaction to me. That sounds like a fair transaction, by the way. I think that donuts are a very fair thing that you want to exchange money for. So always bet dollars to donuts because that's just an exchange and a delicious one at that. But anyway, I digress. I would just bet any amount of money that February and March are probably some of the more depressing times of the year. Um, on a serious note, they probably are because a lot of people are giving up on the goals that they have, the goals that may have been superficial, but again, they're rooted in something more, but they may just not know what that is. And when they fail at that, then we feel this intense shame, not like fulfilling a goal or anything like that. Um, and there's a realization that it wasn't. I think the realization that we need to have around that when we fail at those is not this shame that we feel, even though we do, but instead of realizing that it wasn't our inability to stay disciplined, which it wasn't, we just have to recognize that we had a shitty goal, that our goal was aligned with a result, a superficial result at that, rather than a compelling meaning. And it didn't have any weight to it, pun intended, because I know we're talking about weight loss. So what I want to propose here is that you shouldn't pin the success of your year on superficial goals. You really shouldn't. Don't start there. Instead, start bigger. When you look at your year, don't look at your goals, but start with your priorities. All right. So instead of pursuing and setting goals for weight loss or whatever like that, when you're looking at this, start out by setting your priorities. And here's how this starts. When I've read a book by Benjamin Hardy, he wrote 10X is easier than 2X. He's written The Gap and the Gain, a number of different books with Dan Sullivan. And one of the recent books that I've read is Be Your Future Self Now. And he talks in that about setting priorities, specifically talking about setting he sets three priorities for his life. Often they're related to what he wants to achieve in the next 3 years. I think that in the book he describes that he wants to be a best-selling author of such and such books. And in terms of that, he wants to be a great father to his kids, certain priorities like that. But he talks about these ideas of priorities that you want to narrow them down to three specific things. And Jim Collins in Good to Great also talks about our priorities, that if we have any more than three priorities, we have no priorities. And that's a trap we often get into as well, is that when we start the beginning of a year, we're often adding things. We're not taking things away. When was the last time you met a New Year's resolution where you were going to take some of your priorities or your goals away? No, you set new goals. You put new things on your plate. You set yourself up to be overwhelmed. Did you have time to do more before the holidays? Often you didn't, but you also didn't look at what you need to give up to achieve the result that you wanted to achieve. And this is where the priorities really matter. Because when you look at priorities, not just for the next year, but for the next 5 years, say, and you narrow them down to three priorities of what you want to become, that forces you to actually get into this mindset of getting really focused and getting really attentive to what you want. It also forces you to subtract. And this is not a scarcity exercise, by the way. Even though it seems like a scarcity exercise because you're taking things away, it's actually an abundance exercise because you're not taking things away. You're removing obstacles. You're removing distractions to the things that make yourself the best, that can give yourself the best life. Because when you identify the priorities in your life, when you identify the three biggest priorities of your life, then you set yourself up to go in that direction, to enjoy the journey. And it gives you that intentionality you need to set the right type of goals. That's right. That's where you start getting into the goal setting. Once you set your priorities, you can start setting your goals around those priorities. What do you want to achieve in the next year that is aligned with those priorities? What what are the things, the goals that you want to achieve in the next 90 days that align with those yearly goals? It all stems from the priorities you have and the priorities that you want to have. If you want to know how to get to those priorities, you might be thinking to yourself, how do I find these priorities? Well, your priorities stem from your core values. And we've talked a lot about your core values on this show. In fact, a few episodes prior, I talked about an exercise that you can find. You can find a vision for your life. Like you could start a starting place to find your core values is to do that end of life exercise where you think of yourself on the deathbed, or even taking it a step further. Rick Warren of Saddleback Church, he suggested in the past that you actually look at it as if you were standing in front of God, talking about what you've achieved and what do you want to do there. But if you're not spiritual in nature, then maybe you can look at your deathbed and look at the people around you and see the faces and listen to the things that they're telling you about what they appreciate, and that you're reflecting back on your life and what happened in your life to make it so special. That is the root of where your values lie, what your true core values are. It's not in losing weight. It's not, your core values are not in losing the next 10 pounds or making this amount of money. For me, I discovered this pretty recently as well, that, I've obviously wanted to be a successful person. I've wanted to, be successful in business and investing and rack up all sorts of achievements and all that. And those achievements are great. They give you something to look on as a point of reference for all the things that you can achieve. But when I look forward to my priorities and I look to where I'm at now, pretty successful, pretty, have, been in a state where I've been at the top of the ladder and things like that. I realize that those things you have to be very careful with, because they're not the root of happiness. The idea of getting to the top or a position that you might want to get to, or making a certain amount of money, or those kind of material things, or finishing an Ironman triathlon. They may make you happy in the moment, but do they give you lasting joy? Not if they're not aligned with your priorities. And it made me reflect on it recently on what my priorities are for the future, for me, for the next 5 years. And when I looked at that, I prayed on it, because I'm a spiritual person. I believe in God. My higher power has worked miracles in my life since getting sober. And that's something I feel to my core. And if that makes people uncomfortable, I can understand why. It used to make me uncomfortable. But when I got sober, I know that there was a divine, presence there to help me through that. As I saw with everybody else who had a willingness to free themselves of addiction and a willingness to accept that higher power. And, that framed a strong spiritual foundation for me, one that has grown recently in this past year, again, where I have just connected more amidst the challenges that I've faced recently. I've connected with my higher power again, with God. And that leads me to my first priority of strengthening that spiritual component of my life, getting closer to God and living in more alignment with what I believe, or what, what I'm called to do, that I believe is a spiritual calling. And so that's my first priority in the next few years, is embrace that spiritual calling and lean more into that spiritual calling. Hey everyone, I interrupt this program to introduce you to a powerful tool that will help you gain clarity on your vision and accelerate your growth and achievement. If you're listening to this show, it is likely that you have an exciting vision for your life. But the problem is that we often get caught up in the day-to-day. We get distracted. We face uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. And as a result, the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems insurmountable. And that's why I created a framework for how you can turn your vision into strategic, disciplined action that will accelerate your results in the next 90 days. I call it the Vision Reflection Retreat. It is a 2-day solo excursion designed to reignite passion and adventure into your busy life and realign your focus toward your why. This is the very same framework that I use every 90 days to reflect on my own life and my vision and set my goals for the next quarter. And it has been a game changer. And the good news is that I'm giving away this Vision Reflection Retreat guidebook for free when you sign up for my newsletter. Simply go to flowoverfear.com/retreat and download your free guide and enjoy the journey. The second one has to do with my kids. My kids are now 16 and 13, and they're approaching that age, where we're gonna have fewer days left with them in the house, where they're going to be going to college or going off on their own soon, or starting their own things, within the next few years. And my goal, my priority, one of my priorities for the next year is to help them as much as I can to become self-sufficient and capable and confident and compassionate human adults when they hit adulthood. That's my second. That's the second priority that I have for the next few years. And then the third one has to do with creativity. And this is an important one for me. And this is probably the more selfish of those priorities in my life, because creativity is something that's always filled me up. It's always given me energy. When I started out as a musician early in life, playing the cello, it gave me energy. It gave me fulfillment. It filled me up. Things like doing art, creating podcasts, speaking on stage, playing music, performing in certain ways, telling stupid dad jokes. Those things fill me up, and I think they light other people up as well, from what I've seen and in the results of what I've seen. And so my third priority is to lean into that creative funnel, that creative energy, and embrace that creativity more and more. Those are the three priorities I have in my life. Strengthen the spiritual component of my life, help my kids to become confident and capable and self-sustaining adults, and embrace that creative spirit that I have. Notice that nowhere in there does it talk about losing weight, or notice that nowhere in those priorities is there anything about making a whole bunch of money or being wildly successful at job A or job B or whatever. Because I think that in those three things will drive the greatest and best use of me in this world. And I may, that may be wrong, but that's my perception. That's my belief at this time. And that's one of the great things about priorities, is that you can adjust them over time if they don't fill and they don't align with your values. But truthfully, I think that the spiritual component will hopefully allow me to be a better service to people, as with the creativity component. That's just using the talents that I believe that I might have. And I think that you should do an exercise like this for yourself, where you really, really look deeply, look at your core values, look at what fills you up in life, and set those priorities. Don't just set them over superficial things or desires that we have in our brains, or that are built on fear of scarcity or anything like that. Think of them in the terms of abundance. What really lights you up? What really do you feel is the calling for you in your life? And set those priorities for yourself. And it's something to really meditate on and think a lot about, and not just set just because it's the first part of January. It's really something to think deeply about. And if you want to dig more into that, I've created a free resource that I have on my website called the Vision Reflection Retreat. It's a way that you can get away for 2 days, 2 full days, solo excursion, where you go on an adventure or you go out camping. You just get out by yourself and you spend those days reflecting on your life, on what's been great, what's been wonderful about your life thus far. What were the wins? What are your talents? What are some of those things that would work for you? And then you spend the next day setting your vision for your life. And part of that vision is creating the priorities that will exist in your life. And from those priorities come your goals, the goals that you have. And they're, this is where the SMART goals come into play, where they're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. You can set goals that fuel or that are leading indicators into those priorities. Like, what are some of the leading indicators that will lead into you becoming more spiritually connected with God? Well, one of those things, maybe it's giving more of your time and your money, or something like that. Those are certainly some of the goals that I've put into play. For my family, it's teaching them, it's helping them, or finding courses for my kids on financial well-being or survival, or things that might help them to become sustainable adults. Those are kind of the leading indicators that will lead into those priorities. Or when you look at the creativity, maybe it's just learning a new instrument, taking a comedy course. Yes, that's right, folks. Look out, comedy stages across the world, because I'm going to be taking stand-up comedy courses this first quarter. I know. It's kind of scary, isn't it? But really, those are the things, though, but when I set those goals, it's so much more compelling than a silly weight loss goal, or a silly, I need to make this much money kind of goal. It's so much more compelling because those goals, taking a course that helps lead into stand-up comedy, it fuels that priority that I have for the next few years, makes it more exciting. That's where that passion comes from. That's where you become more disciplined, and you find greater conviction when you align those goals with your priorities, and those priorities are aligned with your values. It'll make you progress, and you'll find fulfillment in the journey. That's the biggest difference between priorities and goals, really, is that priorities are centered on the idea of focus and discipline and correction when you miss the mark. Failure with your priorities isn't really, because your priorities are an ongoing journey, really, and it's enjoyment in the journey. Failure is not really a thing. You're constantly learning from experiences so that you can grow closer to those priorities and closer alignment to the priorities. So there's no failure. Goals, on the other hand, that's where failure comes into play. If you pin everything, if goals are more focused on success or failure, and if you pin everything on your goals without the right priorities, now let me say that again. If you pin everything on your goals without the right priorities, you just feel shame. You don't learn because you pin everything on your goals. And that's where shame comes in. It's a painful place to be. I was there for many, many times during the first 3 decades of my life. And, that shame creeps in every once in a while. It really does. It is something we have to actively work through. But when you have key priorities, and when you're clear about those, when they're aligned with your values, you either succeed with the goals that you set. Meaning, maybe I succeed on finishing a stand-up comedy course, or maybe I succeed in helping my kids learn the financial aspects of or survival skills that they might need. And maybe I succeed in being in service in some ways. And if I don't, I learn and I adjust and I get in alignment with that. And I can accept maybe that stand-up comedy isn't my jam, so I won't continue with it. But it doesn't mean that creativity isn't something that's a priority for me. I already know that. And that's the beauty of it, is you can adjust, you can learn, and you can correct course. So my suggestion to you today is, as you look at where you're at, if you set resolutions for the year or not, or if you set goals for the year or not, I would advise you just to put those aside for a moment. Don't stop them. Because if they fill you up, if you're enjoying the process, by all means, keep going with it if you enjoy it, if it fills you up. But I would recommend that you just put them aside for a moment and look at your priorities. What truly are the 3 core priorities that you have for the next 3 to 5 years? What is it that you want to prioritize? What do you want to be aligned with? When people look back on you, when you look back on your life 3 to 5 years from now, what do you want to say were the three core things that you worked to improve, foster, or create in your life? And really think about those. I think it's important to look at those from the perspective of, do they have a spiritual element? Is there a service element? Is there a personal development element to it that really helps drive you forward from not just a financial or a health or whatever standpoint, but really for the benefit of the highest and best use of you. What is the highest and best use of you? Set the 3 priorities that are associated with that, and then make that your New Year's resolution, to set those 3 priorities and just to live in alignment with those 3 priorities, and see how quickly you can find the SMART goals that can align with those priorities that you can pursue and achieve, and actually not, and even if you don't achieve them, that you learn from them and you still find joy in the journey of doing it. That's my suggestion to you as you continue into 2024. I wish you the best, all of the best this new year. And again, if you need help with finding your vision or reflecting on the good things in your life, I would really recommend downloading my free vision reflection retreat guide. That's on my website at adamcliffordhill.com. You can find that on the homepage right there. Just sign up. You'll start getting my newsletter, and you'll be able to download that free guide. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me today on Flow Over Fear. If you are liking this show, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be first to know when I drop a new episode, including interviews or trainings or dad jokes. That's right, dad jokes. Add a little levity to your life. And if you liked this episode in particular, and you think somebody can get something from it, please share it with a friend. And that way we'll spread the message together. Thanks again for joining me today.